Conan walked so that your favorite fantasy could run. But if Conan walked, its author had to crawl. Welcome in. Today we're going to be talking about Conan, but more appropriately we're going to be talking about the author of Conan, Robert E. Howard. I think Robert E. Howard is a really fascinating guy, mainly because his influence on media is insane. So much of modern fantasy has ties back to Robert E. Howard's stories of sword and sorcery. He basically created the entire genre of sword and sorcery. Robert E. Howard had a really hard life. Robert E. Howard grew up around cowboys and outlaws. He was from a little West Texas town in the middle of an oil boom that brought in the worst types of people. So when he grew up, all he saw was the worst types of people. And it really colored his image of society and how people behaved going forward in his life. But Robert E. Howard himself wasn't really about that life. See, he liked poetry and writing and reading. He did like boxing and working out and being strong, but I mean, he was around strong people all the time. He admired these people he saw. He admired their strength and their ferocity. And so he, obviously wanted a piece of that. But he was a more...
Softer.
After Howard graduated, he came back to town. He got a little just crappy job, just working, doing nothing. He hated it. He hated every job he ever had, except for writing. He always wanted to be a writer, but writing always seemed to elude him. He wanted to write poems, but poems didn't pay the bills. They just don't. No one wanted to publish poems. And no one wanted to publish his stories either. The first story he published was called Spear and Fang. And if you want to hear Howard's influence on media, Spear and Fang is the name of the main characters in Primal. He's influenced so much media with the stories he has written, which is a shame because he never got to see any of that influence come to fruition. He never saw any of that. So early in his life, writing just didn't pay the bills. So he kept having to get just bad job and worse job and just terrible job after that, or the hours were too long and he'd write a story and he couldn't get it published, and then he'd get a different job and he would quit that job and work somewhere else. We all know it. We've all been Robert. We are all Robert E. Howard. He never gave up on his dream, though. He just kept pushing. And eventually he had success with Cole the Conqueror. Cole the Conqueror is a precursor to Conan. While he was writing Cole the Conqueror, he was also writing Solomon Kane. And the magazine Weird Tales loved Solomon Kane and actually published it first, even though it was written after Cole the Conqueror. And he started to get a lot more success with the Solomon Kane tales he wrote. And that was also his first foray into the sword and sorcery genre, which he would pioneer, build. He was the sword and sorcery guy. He is the sword and sorcery guy. When you think about sword and sorcery, you think about Conan, you think about Robert E. Howard. That's how influential he is. He finally had some success publishing these sword and sorcery tales, and he started writing these other stories about boxing and these action comics. And he started to have success with that. And he had so much success, he finally quit all these dead-end jobs he was working and became a full-time writer at 23 years old.
Ooh, that's the dream!
I have an audience for this one. But his success would only last 2 years because the Great Depression hit and the 3 other magazines other than Weird Tales that he was writing for all went out of business. So all his boxing stories, they just completely went away. The only magazine that survived was Weird Tales, and they became a bi-monthly magazine. They weren't even holding on as strong as they were. No one was. It was the Depression. Not only did he lose most of his sources of income because of it, but he also lost all of his money because the bank he was banking with went under, and the bank he tried to switch over to also went under. He only had 2 years of success right there. But he didn't stop. He kept working. And somewhere in the back of his mind during this whole time, he was getting into history and Celtic lore and Gaelic lore and his own Irish ancestry. And he was also roaming around Texas. And I believe Conan is heavily inspired by the life Howard lived in Texas. Seeing these rogues, these savages, these barbarians. He was traveling to the southern part of the state with his main occupation being, quote, the wholesale consumption of tortillas, enchiladas, and cheap Spanish wines, which I think is really funny. He would wake up early one morning and just see the foggy, misty Texas landscape, and he got this image of Samaria in his mind, the land where Conan is from, and that's when he started writing Conan. He took inspirations from his past stories, mythology he had read, his own life, and he put together the story of Conan the Barbarian. And Conan was a smash hit for him. It was his biggest success by far. That's what everyone knows him for today is Conan the Barbarian. No one, I mean, some people know Solomon Kane, some people know Cole. I doubt very many people have read his other stories about boxing, but everyone knows Conan the Barbarian. One of the things I think about with Conan is that I believe Conan is heavily inspired by Robert E. Howard himself. And what I mean by that is that it's not that he's inspired by, this character is inspired by himself. It's more that he is the idealized version of what Howard wanted to see himself as. He grew up seeing rough and tumbled, hard men, just warriors. But Conan's more than that. He's the toughest man you'll ever meet, but he's also surprisingly nice. He's charming. He's smart. He's clever. He's got all these great characteristics and traits, and I believe that when Howard was writing him, he was himself somewhat of a shy, it's not really described that he's a shy individual, but his one and only recorded girlfriend, which is a really funny thing to say that he has one recorded girlfriend on record. That sounds mean. But the one confirmed girlfriend that he had said she would defend him from people who would call him a freak and other such words. And so maybe he would hear that people didn't like him that much. Maybe he felt like an outcast. Maybe he felt like in a world that was so hard that he was the only person he didn't feel that way. He did, however, feel that the natural state of the world was barbarism. Conan famously says in one of the books, "Civilized men are more discourteous than savages because they know they can be impolite without having their skulls split." I think that's telling of a world that Robert E. Howard grew up in. He would see if someone was to say something, because that comes from a moment where someone says something extremely rude to Conan, and he just tells him that, just straight up, like, I could kill you. Like, he's like, look at me, I look at you, you're a scrawny little nerd, I could kill you. And I think that's very telling of a world that Robert E. Howard grew up in, where if someone did say something like that, then they'd be likely to pull a gun and shoot you. I think that Howard wanted to be more like Conan in a lot of ways. He had a history of writing himself into characters, and ended up writing a character that he would want to be more like. Fortunately, all good things come to an end, and he would eventually end up moving on from Conan in a way. He would end up writing more Westerns. And he was actually getting really popular in the Western genre and was considering writing a book. He never actually wrote a full-length book. All the Conan stories are actually short stories put together. He wrote one sort of Conan book, but it was split up. It would end up being published over the course of like several parts in Weird Tales. Fortunately, he never got to see the success of his stories. His mom had been terminally sick with tuberculosis, just like basically her entire life, or Robert's entire life, and was always extremely ill. He was extremely close to his mother. Even though that his stories were starting to break out into the mainstream, Howard himself was feeling worse and worse. He was watching his friends all get married and move on and be successful with their lives. Here he was, his mom was getting worse and worse, and he was feeling more and more alone. And he had tried to reach out and tell his father about it and his previous girlfriend about how he felt, but neither one of them understood what he meant at the time. And his mom entered a coma. So at the peak of his depression, he borrowed a gun from his friend. He wrote down a will, bought a burial plot for his family. His mom had become so ill she fell into a coma. He asked the nurse if she'd ever wake up from the coma, and she said no. Howard went out in the driveway, got in his car, and shot himself in the head. 8 hours later, he passed away, and the next day his mom passed away. Unfortunately, Howard never got to see the success of his stories really shine. Howard felt alone and like he didn't belong, and that finally ended up wearing on him so much that he couldn't take it anymore. There was a multitude of factors why he might have done it. No one's really sure. Some people think he had an Oedipus complex with his mom, which I think is kind of reaching. I mean, a guy loves his mom and is depressed when she dies. It pushes him over the edge. I mean, it's great. It's a crazy reach to me. I think that's insane that some people say that. That's crazy, isn't it? Like, imagine you die, like you kill, and then everyone says, "Oh, he had an Oedipus complex." Like, that's so not fair. Howard's stories became massively popular in the years to come. Everyone loves Conan. That's not up for debate. Everyone loves it. It's not. Unfortunately, Howard's story didn't have a happy ending. But he left us with so many stories that have inspired thousands of people, millions of people, and thousands of stories. In his hometown, his house is a museum now, and they actually hold like this barbarian festival every year, which sounds really fun when I heard about it, and I want to go there and go to Barbarian Fest. I mean, I had no idea. You can't tell me there's a festival called Barbarian Fest and not expect me to perk my ears up when I hear that. Howard's stories have inspired millions of people, and those stories have inspired thousands of stories. Like I said earlier, the entire sword and sorcery genre is thanks to Howard, though you've got to realize those books were written so long ago. There was nothing like them before. He was still a successful writer in his days. These movies, these books, his stories, they've inspired thousands, millions of people. There are people today, ironically enough, who are probably alive because they read his stories. I suppose Howard's story makes me pretty emotional because I feel like I've been there before. So many people are there. I said earlier that a lot of people are probably here because of his stories. And it doesn't matter what reason why you're still here, it's a good reason. Any reason for you to still be here is a good reason. Robert E. Howard might not have survived his battle with depression, but there's still time for you. There was a little bit of Conan in Robert E. Howard, and I think there's a little bit of Conan in all of us too. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.